By 1944, the empire Yamamoto had tried to preserve was in ruins. American submarines had sunk Japan's merchant fleet. B-29s burned its cities. Island after island fell: Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Yamamoto himself was dead, shot down by US P-38s in April 1943 in Operation Vengeance, a mission made possible only because American codebreakers knew his flight schedule. The octopus, once stretching from Burma to the Aleutians, had retracted into a defensive coil around the home islands. Too late and too weak. The Doolittle Raid had not just shocked Japan into realizing America was only beginning to fight. It had awakened a sleeping giant and lit a fire that would consume the empire itself. I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. Attributed to Isoroku Yamamoto, though likely apocryphal, it captures his true sentiment. In the end, Yamamoto's greatest fear came true, not because America was vengeful, but because it was indomitable. And it all began with 16 bombers, a carrier deck, and a leap into the unknown. Guadalcanal became a meat grinder. For 6 months, the US and Japan fought a brutal campaign of air, sea, and land battles. Control of Henderson Field shifted daily. Reinforcements arrived in deadly nocturnal Tokyo Express runs. Marines endured malaria, starvation, and relentless attacks. But unlike Japan, America could replace its losses. Ships. U.S. shipyards launched a new vessel every day. Planes. Factories in California and Kansas churned out fighters and bombers by the thousands. Men. Millions volunteered or were drafted into a rapidly expanding military. Japan, by contrast, lost irreplaceable pilots, ships, and veterans. Its economy strained under blockade. Its logistics collapsed. By February 1943, Japan evacuated its last troops from Guadalcanal. The campaign cost them 25,000 men. America lost 7,100. More importantly, the initiative had passed to the Allies. The Doolittle Raid lasted less than 2 minutes over Tokyo. It caused minimal physical damage. Most crews crash-landed or bailed out over China. 8 airmen were captured, 3 executed. Yet its consequences were world historical. It shattered Japan's psychological armor, proving the homeland was vulnerable. It forced Yamamoto into the Midway gamble, which backfired catastrophically. It galvanized American morale at a critical moment. It accelerated Japan's strategic overextension, leading directly to Guadalcanal and the island-hopping campaign. In essence, 16 bombers reset the course of the Pacific War. As historian John Lundstrom wrote, the Doolittle Raid didn't win the war, but it ensured Japan would lose it. American intelligence had detected Japanese construction of an airfield on Guadalcanal, an obscure island in the Solomon Chain. If completed, it would threaten Allied supply routes to Australia. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, pushed for an immediate counterstrike. General Douglas MacArthur wanted a larger campaign aimed at Rabaul, but King insisted on speed over scale. On August 7, 1942, 19,000 U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal and nearby Tulagi. The Japanese were caught completely off guard. Construction troops fled into the jungle. The Marines seized the nearly completed airfield, soon to be named Henderson Field. But the real battle had just begun. That night, Vice Admiral Genichi Mikawa led a Japanese cruiser force through the Slot, a narrow channel between island chains, and ambushed the Allied fleet in the Battle of Savo Island. In 37 minutes, he sank 4 Allied cruisers. It was a tactical masterpiece, but Mikawa, fearing U.S. carrier strikes at dawn, withdrew without attacking the vulnerable transports. He missed his chance to destroy the beachhead. The Americans held on. From June 4 to 7, 1942, the Battle of Midway unfolded, a turning point in world history. In 5 minutes of dive bombing, American pilots sank 3 Japanese fleet carriers. A 4th was destroyed hours later. In total, Japan lost 4 carriers, a heavy cruiser, 248 aircraft, and over 3,000 men, including its most experienced naval aviators. The U.S. lost 1 carrier, Yorktown, and a destroyer. The defeat was so catastrophic that the Imperial Navy lied about it. News of the loss was suppressed. Even the army didn't know the full extent. Publicly, it was hailed as a victory. But Yamamoto knew the truth. As he wrote to a friend, "I alone must bear the responsibility for this tragedy." The Doolittle Raid had set in motion a chain of events that led directly to this disaster. In trying to secure Japan's perimeter, Yamamoto had overreached and lost the core of his naval air power. While Yamamoto fixated on Midway, the Imperial General Staff pursued its own agenda in the South Pacific, cut off Australia. By early 1942, Japanese forces had taken Rabaul, bombed Darwin, and landed in New Guinea. Their goal? Capture Port Moresby, then leapfrog to Fiji and Samoa, severing U.S.-Australia supply lines. But the Battle of the Coral Sea, May 4th to 8th, 1942, the first carrier battle in history, fought entirely by aircraft, halted the Port Moresby invasion. Though tactically inconclusive, it was a strategic Allied victory. Now, with Midway lost and the U.S. on the offensive, Japan's southern advance stalled. Yet Tokyo refused to adapt. Even after Midway, Imperial headquarters ordered renewed offensives in the Solomons. They believed the Americans were still on the defensive. They were wrong. In Tokyo, panic spread. The Army and Navy high commands were humiliated. How had 16 bombers slipped through their defenses? Why were no fighters scrambled in time? Who was responsible? Emperor Hirohito, usually detached from military affairs, summoned his generals and demanded answers. The incident exposed fatal flaws in Japan's air defense system, intelligence network, and strategic assumptions. Worse, it validated Yamamoto's warnings. The raid proved America was not broken. It was just beginning to fight. And if bombers could reach Tokyo today, what would come tomorrow? The Doolittle Raid did more than damage buildings. It destroyed Japan's strategic timeline. No longer could Tokyo afford to consolidate its empire. Now, it had to defend the homeland. That meant pushing the defensive perimeter farther east, into the Central Pacific. And that led directly to one place, Midway Atoll. Yamamoto seized on the raid as justification for his boldest plan yet. Lure the U.S. carriers into a decisive battle at Midway, destroy them, and force America to the negotiating table. He proposed a two-pronged operation. MI plan, attack Midway Island, drawing out the U.S. Pacific Fleet. AL plan, simultaneously invade the Aleutian Islands, masking the true objective. In Tokyo, the admirals quarreled. The army resisted any diversion from China and Southeast Asia. But Yamamoto, leveraging his prestige and the shock of the Doolittle Raid, won approval. What he didn't know, U.S. cryptanalysts at Station HYPO in Pearl Harbor had broken Japan's naval code, Jan 25. They knew Midway was the target. They knew the date. They knew the order of battle. Admiral Chester Nimitz prepared an ambush. At dawn on April 18th, the USS Hornet, carrying 16 B-25s, was spotted by a Japanese picket boat 650 miles from Japan, far earlier than planned. Faced with the choice of aborting or launching immediately, Doolittle gave the order. Let's go. The bombers roared off the pitching deck, barely clearing the waves. They flew low and fast, evading radar. By noon, they were over Tokyo. To the Japanese, it was incomprehensible. Air raid sirens wailed, but no one took them seriously. Newspapers that morning had declared the homeland invulnerable. Schoolchildren were outside for drills. Factory workers ate lunch on rooftops. Then the bombs fell. Targets included oil tanks, steel mills, and military installations. Damage was modest, about 50 killed, for 100 buildings damaged. But the psychological impact was catastrophic. For the first time since the 13th century, foreign bombs had struck the Japanese home islands. The myth of invincibility, the divine protection of the emperor's realm, was shattered in a single afternoon. The Japanese high command operated under a dangerous illusion, that Western morale was brittle, that democracies were too divided and materialistic to endure hardship, and that once their colonies were lost, they would sue for peace. This belief was rooted in decades of racial ideology and selective observation. Japan had watched America's isolationist debates, Britain's appeasement of Hitler, and France's swift collapse in 1940. They concluded, the West lacked the will to fight. But they missed the deeper truth. Democracies, once united by outrage, could mobilize with terrifying speed and scale. And nothing would unite America faster than an attack on its homeland. That is precisely what Yamamoto feared, and what the Doolittle Raid would deliver. In the wake of Pearl Harbor, America reeled, but did not break. President Franklin D. Roosevelt demanded a retaliatory strike on Japan, not for military gain, but for morale. The American public needed proof that the war could be taken to the enemy. The military needed to show it was not helpless. The problem? Japan lay 4,000 miles across the Pacific. No U.S. bomber had the range. Carriers couldn't get close enough without being detected. Then came a radical idea from Navy Captain Francis Frog Lowe: launch Army B-25 bombers from an aircraft carrier. It was audacious, nearly suicidal. B-25s had never taken off from a carrier. They were too big, too heavy. But Lieutenant Colonel James "Jimmy" Doolittle, a legendary aviator, MIT engineer, and daredevil, believed it could work. In secret, at Eglin Field in Florida, Doolittle trained 80 volunteer airmen. They practiced short-field takeoffs, navigation over open ocean, and emergency procedures. They knew they would not return to the carrier. Their plan: bomb Tokyo and other cities, then fly onto airfields in unoccupied China. It was a one-way mission into the unknown. Now, in early January 1942, the octopus was stretched thin, almost flat. And Yamamoto knew the real war had not yet begun. Yamamoto's unease was not paranoia, it was strategic clarity. While the Imperial General Staff in Tokyo debated whether to invade Australia, strike India, or even march into the Soviet Union, Yamamoto saw a different horizon, a race against time. He believed Japan had, at most, a year and a half of strategic initiative before American industrial might overwhelm the empire. His goal was never total conquest. It was negotiated peace, a settlement that would lock in Japan's gains in Asia while avoiding a protracted war of attrition against a nation with 10 times its population and 100 times its industrial capacity. To that end, Yamamoto had insisted the war begin with a single, devastating blow: Pearl Harbor. Not to destroy America, but to stun it into accepting a new Pacific order. But Pearl Harbor had failed in one critical respect. The U.S. aircraft carriers, the true capital ships of modern naval warfare, had been at sea. They survived, and with them, America's ability to strike back. Now, as reports flooded in from Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies, Yamamoto grew increasingly isolated. His opposition to unlimited war had made him enemies among the Army's hardliners. Friends in Tokyo warned him he might be assassinated if he returned to the capital. So he stayed at sea, aboard the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, a floating fortress that symbolized everything he knew was obsolete. His chief of staff, Admiral Mato Magaki, wrote in his diary of the need for far-sighted statesmanship. It was Yamamoto's phrase, repeated like a mantra. But in Tokyo, no one was listening. On the morning of January 5, 1942, Tokyo was drunk on triumph. In the streets below the Imperial Palace, citizens cheered, waved rising sun flags, and toasted what they believed was the dawn of a new Asian order. In just 5 weeks, the Empire of Japan had achieved what generations of militarists had only dreamed of: the swift, surgical dismantling of Western colonial power across the Pacific. Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941, had crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Singapore, still holding out, but clearly doomed, would fall within 6 weeks. Hong Kong had surrendered on Christmas Day. Manila was in Japanese hands. Wake Island, Guam, the Dutch East Indies, all were falling like dominoes in a meticulously rehearsed imperial ballet. To the average Japanese citizen, and even to many within the military elite, the war was already won. America, that soft, decadent, racially mongrel nation, had been exposed as a paper tiger. Britain was on its knees. The Dutch were irrelevant. China, though stubborn, was contained. But in a quiet office aboard the battleship Yamato, anchored off Hashirajima, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto felt no joy. He had foreseen this moment and dreaded it. Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor strike, was no blind nationalist. A graduate of Harvard, former naval attaché in Washington, and fluent English speaker, He understood America in a way few in Tokyo ever could. He knew its factories, its reservoir of manpower, its restless innovation, and, most dangerously, its capacity for righteous fury once provoked. 3 months before the war began, over tea at the Imperial Navy Club in Shiba, Yamamoto had warned his ultranationalist friend Ryuichi Sasakawa. At first, we'll have everything our own way, like an octopus spreading its tentacles. But then, with chilling prescience, he added, the time for political action will be the moment Singapore falls. After that, it will be too late.